Hello, everybody, and welcome to Church at Home with Rachel for Friday, the 26th of January. Normally, today I would do Feel Good Friday, but I had a bit of pushback from yesterday's video about God's will, and I felt called today to respond to that because I think people made some really good points. And then when I was doing my daily office from Grylls' Soul Fuel, this passage, this reflection, this devotion really spoke to me in connection with that. So I'm going to read that first. It's called No More Religion. Jesus came to destroy religion. Some churches are great communities of God, but some aren't. When it goes bad, religion can feed off the worst of our impulses. A lot of damage gets done in the name of religion: corruption, division, abuse. Religion allows people to build great empires for themselves, whether through power, money, position, fame, reputation, or even just through a false front of respectability. We can live a much freer, truer, more empowered way outside of religion. There is no need for any of us ever to be religious, to do certain rituals, to act all nice and sanitized, like we have it all together, or to attend church out of a sense of trying to earn God's presence. All those things are illusions. True faith allows us to be totally raw, brutally honest, and broken at times. True faith allows us to be quietly kind, to be free, to get down on our knees before Christ, always aware of how much we need his help and strength to lead us forward. The stuck up fall flat on their faces, but down to earth people stand firm. That's he's quoting Proverbs chapter 11, verse 2 from Eugene Peterson's um, interpretation called The Message. At the end of the day, it does not matter if our lives appear to have been a failure or if other people have built more impressive empires than we have. Those things are so transient. All that really matters is that we have searched for God with humility, openness, determination, love, and courage. When we do that, God always finds us. All that really matters is that we have searched for God with humility, openness, determination, love, and courage. When we do that, he always finds us. I found that to be really powerful because I was reading the comments that people um, shared for yesterday morning, as I was doing my daily office. I always check to see if there's any comments or anything like that, things I need to pray for. And I was really like, wow, okay, that message that people were getting from the God's will and the people consenting wasn't what I had anticipated. For some people were, I think they got that, but there was another message in there that I wasn't aware of. I think the Holy Spirit did that, and I'm glad of that because some of the comments that came back to me were absolutely powerful and important. And so if this is a feel good Friday, it's a feel good because I've learned something new, and or maybe relearned something I've forgotten. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that today. When I was talking about God's will, there was a pushback about, what about people who are homeless, people who are in abusive relationships, people who are in like the Syrians and people in, Gaza and Israel and things like that. I understand what you're saying, absolutely. And what I'd like to say is, I do not believe that that's God's will any more than I believe that God's will is happening when a church demands that you have to give all your money to this pastor who can then buy a jet or a stadium or something. I think that church in its best form is when we have community, when we gather as a community, when we can come to each other with our brokenness, when we can say to each other, "This is who I am, and I'm seeking God's will." And one thing I need people to understand is that I do not believe that God's will is ever wrong. I do not believe that God's will ever hurt anyone else. But what I do recognize also is that where God's will is, there's humanity. And humanity often, sometimes with the best of intentions and sometimes just purely with evil, sees God's will and does this. They don't want God's will. God's will, I believe, is that there would be world peace. God's will would be that there would be no homeless people, that there would be no one going hungry, that no person would be abused or would abuse. That is God's will. When God created the earth, when God created, we're told in scripture that God said this is good. And then when people were created, he said this is very good. Whether you take the Bible literally or not, I don't. You know that if you watch me for any length of time. Um, Understanding that it, but the point being that when God created, there's nothing evil about sunshine. There's nothing evil about the rain or or a drought or anything like that. God created things that in and of themselves are perfect. The sun does what the sun does, the rain does what the rain does, the wind does what the wind does. It lives into its intention, it lives into its purpose. The problem is when we start fiddling around with that, create like climate change. Yes, we know from science that there has been climate change in the world before, that we've had the ice ages, there have been floods, there have been droughts, all of these things have happened. But we are also aware that we are contributing. We are making decisions that are not God's will. We are making decisions that harm the earth, that harm what God created, and we are making the decision to continue to do that. It's one thing if we make a decision that harms the earth and we don't know that yet. But as soon as we know differently, then we need to stop. It's like when you're in a relationship with somebody. Um, for instance, I know somebody who really doesn't like to be tickled. Everybody likes to be tickled, right? I hate being tickled, but anyway, this person didn't like to be tickled to the point that their family members tickled them incessantly, and to the point that they actually learned how to not laugh, to take the fun out of it. For those who were tickling them, they stopped laughing, they stopped responding, which took the fun out. And now this person can't be tickled ever. And for those of you, like, I don't like being tickled, but sometimes it's kind of fun, a little bit, to a point. When the people who were tickling this person started to realize that their complaints were like, when they said, no, please don't do that, it's bothering me. Had they stopped doing it, then maybe that person would enjoy a good tickle once in a while. I know it seems like a ridiculous example, but it's real. If when we realize we are harming God's world, we should stop doing that, whether we believe in God or not. Like, we need creation to continue to exist. Here in Alberta, we're having a drought. We don't have enough snow. We didn't have enough rain. What's going to happen to our crops? What's going to happen to the cattle and the animals? What's going to happen to the farmers whose livelihood depends on rain? Because other people are making decisions and have been making decisions and continuing to make decisions against God's will, against doing things that contribute to hurting the world that God created, because they're making those decisions. Now, are we getting better? I hope. I hope we are. We're making different decisions slowly. Is it fast enough? Maybe not, because there are consequences. God's will is perfect. God's will in your life, God's will for you is that you be happy, that you feel like you can contribute, that you can be good at what you're called to do, and what you're not good at, you can enjoy. And when those things don't happen, chances are it's because of the consequences of other wills, those things that have happened. Like, if you have cancer because of smoking, it's not God didn't give you cancer, it's the chemicals in the cigarettes that gave you cancer. There's no judgment there. There's no you're evil, they're evil. It's just this thing caused a consequence which is contrary to what God's will for you is, which is to be healthy. Um, Small scale things like thinking about God's will being done. I thought always I wanted to be a mom, and I was born with a few things that um, I have a pectus excavatum, which means my sternum is concave instead of convex, which pushes in on my lung and my heart. And I've had it my whole life, never, big deal, whatever. I deal with it. But along with that, when I did some research, discovered that this is actually a syndrome that a lot of people born with pectus excavatum also have heart murmurs and scoliosis. Guess what? I always thought those three things were separate, but they actually come together. Is it something that was done wrong or something? No, I don't know what happened. I don't know why the stars lined up or my DNA were lined up to do that. It's who I am. It's what I have to live with. And it's neither, it's just a thing. I deal with it. Does it make life a little bit difficult? Sometimes, especially when I was growing up, but not a big deal now. I am not able to have children. And I wonder if that's a part of my, the way my body was born. I have not ever been able to have children. And that has been hard for me. But I have learned that where I believe that God's will for me was to be nurturing and to be a mother figure, I didn't have to be a mom, a biological mother, to be able to do that. I have had the blessing of working with children and young people in my life and being loved by them back. I have incredible nieces and nephews who fill me up with a love that I don't think I would have known this way had I had children of my own. Is it ideal? No, ideal would be if Rob and I could have had kids together. But the reality is that my life is filled with beauty and wonder, and God has filled into me into a different part of my soul. He's filled up when that other part couldn't be. Um, I told a friend and gave them a heads up that I was going to talk about executive function disorder. When my stepson went into high school, came to live with us, and went into high school, he was having trouble at school, so they put him through some tests to find out that he had executive function disorder. Now, we could have looked at that and said, "You are doomed. This is the problem. You're never going to be able to do X, Y, and Z." Rather than thinking that way, this young man and his dad and I looked at it from a different perspective with the encouragement of some really great teachers and resource people, that this is not a life sentence to something bad. This is an aha moment of no wonder I can't do X, Y, and Z. If I'd known that earlier, then I would have been able to develop ways or coping skills around that. And I know that for some people, those knowledges, those recognizing dyslexia, um, memory problems, things like that, these disabilities don't come to us until later in life. And sometimes we're never diagnosed. We just have a hunch. But the reality, we can choose to live in a place where we say, I am broken. There's something wrong with me. Or we can say, I have a different kind of ability. I can't do that, but I can do this. And that's how this young man has learned to grow up. And that's how we treated him, was like, okay, so you can't do this, your homework in this way. So we're going to help you do it in this way. The end state will be the same. You'll learn what you need to learn. You're just not going to learn it the same way somebody else did. And that has helped me in my role as a priest, because I now recognize when I look around a boardroom or I look around my church and see how people are learning and how they're worshiping and how they're doing things. It's like not everybody learns the same way. Not everybody engages in the same way. Some people have sensory issues. The baptism I did a few weeks ago of a child who maybe on the autism spectrum, who was really, really, really upset about the idea of the water and things like that. And recognizing that just because the church has said this is the way baptism happens, doesn't mean that that's what God says. And so we created a new way of doing baptism in which the end state happened. The child was baptized, but we got there by a completely different road. And it was beautiful and it was life giving and it opened my eyes and has changed the way I think about baptism, because it doesn't have to be the way we think has always been. God's will was done. We just got there by a different route. And even deeper place about God's will. And what about people, like people who are at war? Somebody asked me about that. Um, and and how do we look at them and say, where's God's will in that? I'm reminded of a beautiful person I knew when I was a child. He had been a missionary in China, and he was taken as a prisoner of war by Japan in World War II. And I remember, being a young person, I was probably 10 or 11 years old, and sitting with him and not realizing that maybe it wouldn't be appropriate to ask him about his time as a prisoner of war. I just blurted out, like, how could you believe in God in that? How could you keep your faith, or did you lose your faith? And he answered me, and he told me that he was able to recognize that God wasn't absent. God was there in the people he was with, in that piece of bread that was given to a prisoner, who then broke that bread and gave part of that bread to a child who was hungry, even though they knew they could be punished for giving that bread away if they were seen. And they also didn't know the next time they would be fed. But he shared what he had with a child. He told me that he started to recognize the face of God in the motes of dust in the sun that would come through the little window that they had, that they only saw once in a while. But he could see hope in that little bit, that weak stream of sunlight and the motes of dust floating in it. He recognized God's love in the parent reaching out to a child and giving them a hug, and sharing stories with them. Even though they were in the midst of hell, they knew that God had not abandoned them, that God was still there, that God was still good, because it was not God who was doing this to them. It was their captors who were doing it to them. It was human will, not God's will, that was causing the problem. And I think it's really important that we recognize that it is God's will that we seek God, and we allow ourselves to be open to seeing God. All that really matters is that we have searched for God with humility, openness, determination, love, and courage. When we do that, God will always find us. Religion, the mega churches, some different denominations have sort of brainwashed us to think that if we truly love God and truly want God's will in our lives, then if we're doing all the right things, then God will miraculously give us thousands and thousands of dollars and the perfect job, and end that relationship that's abusive, and everything will be perfect. And that's not the truth. That is a human-made construct for power. What God says to us is, if you come to me in humility, if you come to me with an honest heart, if you come to me and share with me what you're hoping for, what you're fearing, if you come to me with all of who you are, I will find you. God doesn't promise us that we will somehow bounce back up out of the misery of our lives, but God does promise that he will be with us. Jesus died. The whole Jesus died for our sins, absolutely yes, but a big part of understanding, I think, the crucifixion and the sacrifice of Jesus is that we can understand that Jesus understands. Jesus understood what it was to be in pain, to be alone, to feel like there's no one there. And then we have the gift of knowing that when we feel those things, we believe in a God who understands from personal experience what we are going through, and has promised us that we will not be alone. He's not promised us to make it perfect, but promised us that we will not walk alone. If you come to God, if you seek out God in humility and honesty, in the brokenness of who you are, in the joy of who you are, if you're not broken, God will find you. But you have to be willing to be found. God's will is that you would have a beautiful, healthy, whole, spiritual life. All the rest of this stuff that bangs up against God's will, that's not the end state. That's not the end state. But please keep in mind that it is not God's will that you be miserable, or that you be homeless, or that you be in pain or ill. That is not God's will. God's will always, like every good parent, is that their children, God's children, will be whole. The world's will sometimes says something else. We need to learn how to step out of the world's will and work towards God's. Thank you all for hanging in with me, and thank you for challenging me on yesterday's talk, and thank you for reminding me that even if I'm in a great mood and everything's going along really well, doesn't mean it is for everybody else, and I need to have compassion in that. And thank you. Thank you for just being with me. And thank you for sticking with me for 20 minutes if you made it this way. I will be back on Sunday for Gospel on the Go and on Monday for Church at Home with Rachel. God bless you all. Keep on doing your thing. And may God's will truly be done in your lives.